Years ago, the choice was obvious. If you were just getting into watches and didn't want to spend much, there was no better place to start than a mechanical diver from legendary Japanese watchmaker Seiko. They were affordable, robust, and gave you sporty looks with a brand name that had some great history attached to it, all for a price tag that wouldn't make your eyes bleed. You've probably seen famous models like the SKX many times before, either recommended to you endlessly online or simply sitting on people's wrists in the wild. These things were everywhere in the mid-2010s and were essentially the routine recommendation that nerds had for newcomers. These days though, things have gotten a little more complicated. You see, Seiko's Japanese contemporaries have really been stepping up their game over the past decade, all while the reigning champion has been falling asleep at the wheel, with notable price rises and questionable release strategies that have left people wondering, are they really still the go-to choice? Are there better options these days if you're on a tight budget? Well, I've dived into many Chinese alternatives on this channel before, but today I wanted to focus on the other big four Japanese brands, specifically Citizen and Orient, who also make a growing selection of mechanical dive watches for around or under £300, the price bracket that Seiko used to dominate. While Casio has finally ventured into automatics, there's no sign of a diver at the time of recording. So it's just these three of the big four for now. Today I'll be comparing the most competitive options from each of these brands to try and work out which affordable dive watch is truly the best as of right now, and which I would buy if I were you. We're going to be covering quite a few watches today, which will all be affiliate links in the video description. I wish it was as easy as finding out the best belts for men, because few come close to those from my sponsor, Anson Belt and Buckle. Chances are you're still wearing a belt with inch-apart holes that always end up raggy and tattered after a few months, especially if your waist size sits between those holes, which tugs the leather even further. Anson Belts has changed belts forever by bypassing the holes completely. Their belts feature an innovative micro-adjustable system comprising a track sewn into the rear of the belt and a ratchet hidden in the buckle. Together, this system allows you to securely adjust in much finer quarter-inch increments, ensuring you get the perfect fit every single time. What's more, you can change the fit on the fly and in an instant, whether you're sitting, standing, or on the move. Anson belts even ship with interchangeable buckles, which you can switch amongst your belts, ensuring you'll always have the perfect setup to match your outfit. I haven't worn a belt with holes in over 7 years, and I won't be returning. Once you try an Anson belt, I know you won't either. And because Anson Belt and Buckle are sponsoring this video, when you click the link in the description or scan this QR code to build a box set, you get 2 bonus pieces, a buckle and a strap, completely free. That's 3 buckles and 3 straps, which can make 9 unique belt combinations all in one box. So click the link, build your box set, and upgrade your belt game today. So what's available from Team Seiko? What's the reference point? Well, basically, you've got one main diver option under £300 these days, or around $400 US. The Seiko 5 Sports SRPD, as well as its smaller iteration, the Midi, which is codenamed either SRPK or SRPL, both of which are known in the community as the 5KX watches. These models are essentially a rework of the super popular SKX series that was discontinued back in 2019, with near identical externals but slightly altered internals and specs, which did cause some controversy when they were first introduced. You see, the previous SKX watches and their predecessors were true ISO certified dive watches with screw-down crowns, big 200-meter water resistance ratings, and hardy construction that meant durability was never in question. Combined with real-world celebrity endorsements and an attractive sub-$250 price tag, Seiko had a runaway hit on its hands that went on to have a near 30-year run. The replacement models, however, made some covert changes to the formula. The aging 7S26 movement was changed for a slightly less aging 4R36, which added hacking and hand winding. The case finishing and bracelets were fractionally improved, and the dial now featured applied markers rather than the inked indices present on the older models, all of which were generally appreciated. The water resistance, however, was sliced in half. The screw-down crown was completely removed, and the new bezel didn't feature the diver standard loom pip at the top center, meaning the final result felt less substantial, more like a wannabe dive style watch than a true diver, despite the notable price bump. Yet these launch for between $295 and $350 US depending on the version, or around £220 to £300, around 40% higher than the street prices of the former SKX line at the time. And despite defenders claiming said prices would drop rapidly like all Seikos do, it's actually taken well over half a decade to even begin approaching the old SKX's ballpark. Now it does have some other advantages, such as cosmetically altered variants, a large array of straps and colours, and drilled lugs for faster strap changes. Even so, it's hard to call this a unanimously crowd-pleasing release. To many, it felt like a side grade, or at worst, a net downgrade that sacrificed the historical significance of the original, a bastardization of the SKX formula. Grouping the new one into the Seiko 5 sub-brand also proved somewhat contentious, as it meant the remake was now plastered with the price-indicative and divisive Seiko 5 badge, showing onlookers it was among the cheapest Seiko watches that money could buy. You know, they were never going to mistake it for something more expensive. These frustrations have led many prospective buyers to widen their search and consider non-Seiko alternatives that may better fill the void left by the SKX. Hence the Citizen and Orient models I'll be showcasing in a moment. For now, if you're unfamiliar with those Seikos, let's give you a quick rundown of the 5KX models. First, you've got the SRPD, which was the initial model released back in 2019. This is a 42.5mm stainless steel piece modeled directly after the SKX 007, the particular version on screen being the SRPD 73K2, which is this darker one featuring a pretty nice gradation effect dial and some off-white accents. It ships on this black mesh effect silicone strap, though other variants can ship on fabric or steel bands instead. As with the SKX, you get this distinctive tub-like shape, with the crown positioned down at 4 and an overall squat silhouette, meaning this thing wears smaller than the width would have you believe. Its comparatively tiny 45.8mm lug-to-lug length means it rarely overhangs the edges of your wrist. I mean, here it is on my really small 6.25" wrist, and I'd say it looks much closer to the average 40.5mm watch than it does to a 42.5mm one. That logic can't be applied to the thickness though. The SRPD is pretty chunky at just over 13mm, and because of its shortness and visibly protruding caseback, it proportionally looks even thicker than that. It's not huge by any means, but it's certainly not sleek. The case finishing here is decent enough. I mean, the shape and styling of the SKX body doesn't really lend itself to complex finishing techniques. It basically just has curved polished sides and some brushing up top. But hey, it's serviceable, in line with most others you'll see coming up, and the simple layout does make bracelet integration a piece of cake. What's more, around back, you also get a glimpse of the movement within. This model features an exhibition caseback, a feature not present on the former solid-backed SKX. While the SRPD doesn't offer the true diver-level water resistance, 10 bar is still enough for casual water exposure, so you can go swimming in this if you want to, provided the crown is compressed all the way. Though as you'll see, this is still a shortcoming versus many of its rivals. The bezel here is also mediocre, with a high-pitched, tinny, and almost crispy, raspy sound that doesn't inspire confidence, and as you can see, rather predictably, this one falls victim to Seiko's infamously poor bezel quality control, the chevron not being properly aligned with the 12 o'clock marker. You can either go just in front or just behind it. Looks-wise though, there's little to complain about, and while it's only an aluminium insert, stylistically, they tend to match up pretty well with the dials they're paired with. Grip is also good, and there isn't a great deal of backplay during use either. On the right side of the dial, you get a day-date window, similar to most of the others, and as mentioned before, you have some pretty interesting colours and dial finishes to pick from with these Seikos, which I guess is an inherent advantage. You're bound to land on a combo you like. The strap on this model is a fairly decent textured silicone two-piece. Nothing to write home about, and it doesn't have quick-release spring bars, but you can get to it via the drilled lugs, and as a whole it's usable, with a ton of adjustment holes to cater to almost every wrist size. The bracelets you get on some variants are akin to that on my Midi here. They only use folded link construction despite their appearance, which is pretty disappointing. Seiko designs these to look like solid steel links from the outside, but they're actually using a type of concealed folded link construction, along with hollow end links and pretty feeble stamped steel clasps. If I remember correctly, the 42.5mm versions have a clasp with 4 micro adjustment holes, which is good, while smaller wristed folk are resigned to Amiga 2 on the Midi. That's one of the only real differences between the two versions. Aside from that, the newer SRPL or SRPK, also known as the Midi, is near identical to its SRPD brethren, simply coming in at 37.5mm instead. Paired with a 44mm lug-to-lug and a slimmer 12.3mm profile, the Midi does wear true to its name and is noticeably smaller than its predecessor, making it a much more obvious choice for small wrists. Small automatic divers with original designs are surprisingly tricky to come by at this price, so the Midi is a bit of a standout in that department. At present, the colour roster isn't nearly as broad as the SRPD, and they aren't as widely available in general, but I personally prefer this version, not just because it fits me better, but also because its more compact dial gives the design more balance and proportionality. Both versions, and in fact virtually all affordable Seikos, include what they call a hard Lex crystal, which is basically a hardened mineral crystal that they claim is better than the standard stuff. I scratch tested hard Lex a while back, and it does indeed perform better than the standard mineral glass found on many budget watches, albeit still falls short of Sapphire's hardness, no matter what the marketing may tell you. That said, while other options may receive fewer scratches, Hardlex at least offers true window-like dial visibility, in a segment where many budget sapphire crystals tend to introduce haziness that can spoil the contrast and punchiness of the dial beneath. This punchiness extends to low-light performance too. In the dark, you'll have no trouble reading most Seikos, as their blue lume is generally among the brightest in the affordable space. That applies here too, as you can see. Seiko has since expanded its 5KX collection to include the likes of the Redux offshoot, which changes up those markers, a 40mm bezel-free version, and a GMT version, which will cost you a bunch more, but I think is arguably the best all-around choice. If I were after a Seiko and had slightly larger wrists, that's the one I'd be looking at. Seiko used to make the Mini Turtle SRPC 30 series, which would have been an interesting extra contender at a similar price point with a really unique circular wear experience, albeit that one was canned a few years back and hasn't been revived just yet. So yeah, that's what Seiko can muster in this day and age. What else is out there for under 300 quid? Because that's like the price cap for this video. Well, the closest stop to home is probably Seiko's sister brand, Orient. Sitting beneath the same Seiko Epson umbrella, Orient watches are similar in certain ways, but completely different in others. And ever since the pandemic hit, they've been dishing out dive watches like they were PPE. To save time, I'll run you through the shared characteristics you'll find on watches from their two most popular current gen ranges, the Kamasu and Mako series, as many models here are effectively reskins of one another, with the same core components and slight cosmetic alterations up top, though I will touch on any outliers as we progress. The stainless steel cases here are done to a comparable standard to the Seiko offerings, a trend you'll see continue throughout this video. These three brands are very evenly matched on that front. Again, you have a pretty simple arrangement of polished flanks and brushed lugs on most models. The shape though differs significantly from those Seikos. While only a hair thinner than the SRPD, most Orient models look a whole lot slimmer, as they've slightly longer lug-to-lug lengths and a steeper taper towards the lugs, making them feel proportionally flatter on wrist. One exception to this rule is the Kamasu V2, which may be proportionally similar to the rest, but has brushed flanks instead, which I think better define the polished lip running across the top, and it kind of makes it look even thinner again. For sure, this is my favourite case of the bunch. Size-wise, most Mako and Kamasu watches measure 41.8mm across, with a lug-to-lug of around 46.5mm and a thickness just under 13. This means there's still a no-go for small wrists and are a little more expansive than the Seiko, with wider dials and longer lugs, but are still in range for most male arms. Those after a more compact piece aren't left out to dry though. Orient also serves up their attractive Mako 40 or Mako Sport that provides a similar vibe in a smaller footprint. This one has much of the same structure from a distance, but forgoes the crown guards and squeezes the same flagship features into a narrower 39.8mm shell with a tighter 20mm lug width. And what are those features? Well, here you generally get the full diver standard specs across the board, meaning a huge 200-meter water resistance rating, a proper screw-down crown, this time at the more typical 3 o'clock position, and a threaded caseback. While most models aren't ISO certified like the original SKX was, they still have a great record for reliability. The rotating bezels on most Orients edge out those from the entry-level Seikos, and while their grip level is reduced, their action is tighter and noticeably less tinny and scratchy. Outside of the Mako 40, which is a bit of a hybrid design, they all feature lume pips too, which the Seiko doesn't, though low-light performance falls a bit short of Seiko and Citizen's offerings. Still usable for sure, but Orient's green lume seems the weakest of the three brands on average. What Orient does boast is arguably the most luxurious looking designs for the money. The Kamasus and Mako 40s in particular are really pretty, with hands, markers and bezels that feel much more inventive and well considered than those on most Seiko and Citizen alternatives. That extends to the colour selection too, as while Orient may not boast the sheer quantity of colours offered by Seiko, and some are a bit questionable, their riskier approach has left them with a catalogue that packs some distinctiveness and classiness unrivaled by its fellow countrymen, particularly in the sub £300 range which we're focusing on in this video. The Kamasu range has really angular markers, giving them a sharp, almost shark-like aesthetic. The Mako 40 has a much more modern take on the diver styling, with a steel bezel and a nice half-skeletonized handset, while the Mako 3 has a cool interplay of colours, with the dials often falling directly between the two tones on the bezels. The only caveat to these niceties is that some variants are a little desaturated, which is compounded by the crystals Orient tends to use on these. Indeed, Orient was one of the first to garner plaudits for introducing sapphire crystals across its current generation lineup, sapphire being widely considered the premier choice due to its excellent scratch resistance, making it the go-to for most luxury watch brands. And while such a performance upgrade is appreciated and worth noting as an advantage, it does have one downside. that being legibility. These are far from the clearest cuts of sapphire I've seen, and they lack any good anti-reflective coating too, meaning you get some of that stereotypical sapphire haziness that neuters the dials beneath. It's not disastrous, nor a deal breaker like on the Casio EFK 100 for instance, but it is a frustration that holds back what could have been an objective strength over its rivals. But hey, at least you won't scratch them. Under the hood, you do get something much more consistent, that being Orient's impressive in-house manufactured automatic movements. Most models use the F6922 or the smaller F6722, which are functionally near identical to one another. Personally, I take these over the Seiko or Citizen Alternatives, given they're generally less audible due to their lower pitch and have a reduced tendency to spin wildly. At least from my experience, they're more accurate out of the box too. According to 2 separate watch dealers I've spoken to, failing Seiko movements seem much more commonly encountered, even with similar sales figures. The stock straps are a real mixed bag though. I mean, the bracelets, for instance, are generally better than Seiko's, with solid steel links, except the end links, with the smaller models retaining the full complement of adjustment holes on the clasp too. Not sure why you'd ever reduce those. The rubber or silicone bands are maybe a hair better quality too, though the leather bands on some Mako 40 models are nothing short of atrocious. I mean, I've never been a big fan of pass-through straps in general, but these are so insultingly poor that I'd be too embarrassed to use them as dog leads. It goes without saying, stick to the bracelets or the silicone strap models, or factor in a third-party replacement. You're gonna need it. Now, it's not just the current gen Orients that are worth eyeing up. You see, unlike most brands who completely cull their older models when new versions get released, you can still grab many of Orient's last gen models today, including their venerable Raid 2 and Mako 2 dive watches, which launched back in 2016. These were 2 of the models that a lot of enthusiasts immediately reverted to following the SKX discontinuation, and in many ways it's clear to see why. These watches are a direct match for the old SKX on the spec sheet, aside from the official ISO rating, with steel cases, 200 meters of water resistance, screw-down crowns, and similar mineral crystals for often a considerable amount less than the newer gen stuff. I have to say, these are watches I was apathetic to originally, but I've since come around to quite a lot. While some colours like the Black Ray 2 are very underwhelming and don't exude much sense of quality, others, particularly the blue dial variants, are far more luscious, meaning they can still compete admirably today, especially from a price to performance perspective. Outside of the crystal, these watches aren't all that much worse than their newer counterparts, with the same movement, most of the same materials, very similar case finishing, and in some cases, even comparable styling for a chunk less money. These also measure in with a marginally narrower width at 41.5mm, but look even more compact thanks to the smaller bezel and consequently smaller dial. These are probably some of the most versatile fitting on this list. My main reservations with these old-timers are that the bezel designs are rather dated, the colour selection is extremely limited, with only the most predictable choices available, and the resin bands can be cartoonishly long for some weird reason. The bracelets are pretty decent though, so I'd stick to those unless you've got a particularly large wrist or a limited selection to pick from. Surprisingly, there are even more options out there from Orient, which I covered extensively in my big Orient Top 20 Roundup video, but those few are the most direct competitors to me. As a whole, Orient is a pretty interesting Seiko alternative, but our next contender brings 2 radically different options to the table. Historically, Citizen's primary SKX challenger was always the NY0040, which, like the SKX, also dates back to the mid-1990s. Surprisingly, you can still buy this one today, and while it's received some internal modernizations, as far as the outer shell goes, it's truly a blast from the past. If you've ever bought new old stock of something, this is like your wristwatch equivalent. The blue version has a proper pre-2000s denim-like color scheme, with green tinted lume and peculiar coral accents that you'd be hard-pressed to find on any new releases. It's also got a bizarre crown placement at 8 o'clock, making it look rather like a mirrored version of the SKX. Supposedly this is for safety and comfort, to prevent the crown catching on anything or from digging into the back of your hand, and yeah, this thing is indeed pretty comfortable on the wrist. You'd also be forgiven for thinking this were among the smallest watches in this video. It certainly looks that way when sat there, however, it's actually quite deceiving, as the NY0040 is surprisingly a touch wider than the larger Orient options, at a mystifying 41.9mm. The trick here is that the bezel is much narrower than the case, leaving you with a smaller dial and consequently a far more compact look from above. The lug-to-lug is also really short like the Seiko at only 47.3mm, meaning it can accommodate a wide variety of wrist sizes, and in general the shape here is very SKX-like, with extreme curvature and even a matching dispersal of brushing and polishing. Citizen unequivocally has the best bezels on this list, and while it can't match the sleek ceramic bezels offered up by some Chinese brands, they generally do a good job of making their bezels feel rock solid during operation. Here you get absolutely no backplate, And while the bezel may only be 60 click, I'd undoubtedly take it over the cheaper, tinnier feeling 120 click bezels present on the other two brands. The clunks here are much more tactile, the sound is more satisfying, and grip is never a problem, though the start-stop placement of the knurling does look a little unusual. The remaining strengths and weaknesses of this piece are pretty straightforward. You still get the proper ISO certified 200 meter water resistance rating you would have found on the SKX, it's got that threaded crown, and a confidence-inspiring screwed case back. Surprisingly, considering those features, it's one of the thinnest options here as well, at only 12.5mm, and that's despite containing the thickest movement of the bunch, the Miyota 8204. While not necessarily bad for the money, the 8000 series is generally considered weaker than its rivals, primarily because of its noisier, high-pitched rotor whir and the overall chunkiness, though, like I said, the latter doesn't seem to afflict this model for some reason, as it's still quite slim. The bog standard mineral crystal is also a slight downgrade over the other divers, and some elements, like the really flat rear-punched owl markers, do cheapen the overall appearance up close. The polyurethane straps, though, are quite pleasing, with a solid feel and plenty of adjustment holes, meaning you won't have to seek out a replacement unless you want to switch up the look. Overall, these are a pretty underrated choice these days, and while they're not as cheap as they were a few years ago, the NY0040 can still be had for much less than most other models, which slides it right back into contention. For a less dated vibe, you'll probably want to check out the black version instead, which gives you a noticeably cleaner dial, or the newer Promaster Fugu, which is a little hard to come by, but it's effectively a similarly spec'd, bulkier version that you can sometimes grab for around our £300 price cap. The prize for the best looking citizen diver is a close contest between two much newer options, the NY0120 and the recently released Tsuyosa Shore. These two take polar opposite approaches, yet still end up producing equally handsome results. The NY0120 is the more serious of the two, with a tank-like shape and in-hand feel. Yeah, that's also the big downside of this one, which we'll get out of the way first. It's pretty thick from side on, as you can see. It measures a mighty 13.8mm from top to bottom, partly due to its thick squared off bezel and a protruding case back, which will pose a challenge to longer sleeves. On the positive side, this added heft does make it feel like it could waltz its way through an apocalypse if needed. Yeah, if I had to pick the most durable watch on this list, it would absolutely be this NY0120. This theme extends to the 20mm bracelet, which is the only one I'll be showing today, to feature solid steel links throughout, a proper milled steel clasp, and an adjustable multi-step diver's extension, which combine to give it much more of a premium feel. It features some mini links for further adjustments, and overall, it's undoubtedly the best bracelet from a material perspective. That said, the finishing on both the case and bracelet is very basic, with a simplistic brushed finish across their entirety. This leaves the NY0120 with somewhat of a prototype look, as if the design hasn't been finalized yet, and while it's not ugly, kind of looks rugged, it's still not nearly as eye-catching as the majority of cases, which tend to throw in some polishing here and there for extra dynamism. What is eye-catching is the really cool dials you get with these models. Here you get access to the most impressive textures out of these budget Japanese divers, with sand-like micro-reflect surfaces that hold up surprisingly well under macro examination. The yellow model features a steep gradation towards the edges, an effect you'll see replicated on the handful of other colours this watch ships in, most of which look really fresh too. The most impressive part is perhaps how the crystal interacts with the overall design. The curved edge of this mineral crystal sells the illusion that the dial is kind of submerged beneath a mini vat of liquid, as if the glass were the water's surface and the dial were the sea floor. It plays with the light really gracefully and looks higher end than the beveled edge crystal on the Seiko, albeit its scratch resistance won't match several of the harder options on this list. However, this thing boasts some cracked out luminescence. Visibility is good, both in daytime and low light. It's got the large markers typical of many past and present citizen watches, with a hue that doesn't quite match the hands, which is a shame. It and the older NY0040 both perform far better than most citizen watches I've tested, which usually have a habit of leaving you squinting as soon as the lights get low. Again, this has a nice firm 60-click bezel with no signs of backplay, and the NY0120 is also ISO certified with a silky screw-down crown and a 200-meter water resistance rating. Basically, it'll be laughing at your local swimming baths. The width is more modest than you'd think, at only 41mm wide, though the broad 51.6mm lug-to-lug and aforementioned thickness do mean it's best suited to average or larger arms. Prices and availability on this one also vary massively depending on region, so keep your eyes peeled. but if you can get it for around or under £200, as I've seen it for occasionally, it's a bit of a hidden gem that most people don't seem to know about. A not so hidden gem is the new Tsuyosa Shore that released during the making of this video. Talk about adding work to my pile. But yeah, the original Citizen Tsuyosa is a very well-known Rolex-like sports watch that first hit the market a few years back. It's available in a couple of sizes and ships in more colours than a packet of Skittles. This newer iteration takes that integrated sports watch and lobs a bezel on it. And you know what? It kind of works. Yeah, I was quite skeptical about this when they announced it. I quite liked, but never loved its forebearer. However, I'd say the visuals are arguably improved here with all the extra detailing. The standard Tsuyosa was pretty much a Rolex Oyster Perpetual clone, but this new Shore stands more on its own 2 feet, with a minimalist, yet not quite as plain look, and light diver theming that means the previously out-of-place Cyclops actually makes sense this time. Indeed, this is the only option here with a magnified view of the date wheel, despite not really being a true diver. Yeah, the Shore is more akin to the Seikos I started with, a dive-style watch with some sports watch elements and even a few hints of dressiness thrown in there. It may have a screw back, but lacks a screw-down crown, and you're limited to a more modest 10 bar or 100 meter water resistance rating, which is still decent, but not as infallible as most of the other options. Nevertheless, you do get a great deal of versatility in its place. The Tsuyosa Shore has one of those designs that you could pull off with just about anything, particularly in this old reliable navy blue, which I'm sure will end up being the best selling of the launch colours. Blue and black always seem to see the most uptake. I think us guys just find them the easiest to pair stuff with. You can grab this in 3 more experimental guises though if you're after something brighter. Another reason I prefer this over the original Tsuyosa is the case shape. The standard model has a bizarrely thin mid case which exposes the underside of the watch way more than it should. Proportionally, this makes the rear protrude to a level Kim Kardashian would be proud of, and it made the whole package look unnecessarily floaty and thick, especially considering it wasn't nearly that big on paper. Ironically, this new iteration measures in at a larger 12.6mm, but appears much thinner as Citizen has lowered and expanded the mid case, essentially halving the gap to the wrist, transforming the Shore into a much sleeker looking timepiece. It's still not perfect, but I think this is the way the original Tsuyosa should always have fitted. At 40mm, it's reasonably compact with a lug-to-lug that really varies depending on where you measure. This model also has an integrated design, meaning the bracelet is proprietary with small protruding end links. But even so, it's towards the smaller end as far as our contenders are concerned, and long sleeves really shouldn't be a problem. Seeing as though you're stuck with it, you'd hope the stock bracelet were good, and thankfully, it's totally viable. It houses solid steel links throughout, just the right amount of taper, and a clasp that narrowly, but thankfully gets the job done. It's only got 2 micro adjustment holes to pick from, but the links are small enough here to where this shouldn't be an issue. And the clasp is the nice milled type again, which just feels more assuring than the cheaper stamped stuff. Both this and the yellow NY0120 are powered by Miyota 8200 series units, similar to the one I mentioned earlier. The bezel though is much better than you'd think, considering it's not a fully committed dive watch. In fact, this is the most accomplished 120 click unit here by some margin. It's got much better defined clicks than the Orient and Seiko offerings, with far less play and mushiness, and you get that almost beady sound indicative of most higher quality ratchets. It's one of those that you can't help but fiddle with. The crystal is a bit of a mixed bag. It's sapphire, which is good, but it showcases much of the same haziness exhibited by the Orient divers I mentioned earlier. And the lume on this particular model isn't nearly as strong as the proper Citizen divers, meaning it struggles to keep up in the dark. Design-wise, I can also see how some could perceive this as a little too boring or vanilla. It's far from the most character-rich design we've seen over the years, but it is undeniably sleek and inoffensive. I doubt you'll find anyone who hates the look of the Tsuyosa Shore. Personally, I think it's one of the best looking options at this end of the market, especially if you're more into low-profile, fashion-forward designs that aren't too loud and proud. This one only just squeezes under the price ceiling of this video though, so its bang for the buck is a little more questionable. But how does it stack up versus the rest of the field? Well, now I've shown you all of these Japanese divers, how about we have a go at answering that question in the title? Oh, and which would I personally pick out of this ragtag rabble? Well, my thoughts are pretty clear. I truly don't think there's an obvious winner. While these watches all look quite different and even have a variety of specs, movements and features, they each have an array of strengths and weaknesses that ultimately land them in a similar spot. As soon as one emerges as the frontrunner, a shortcoming crops up that seems to rein it right back in. I think we're still waiting for one of these brands to take the bull by the horns and produce a no-nonsense top-tier budget dive watch to really escape the pack. A watch with no obvious weaknesses, which can't be said for those we've covered today. And a tie like this really still counts as a loss for Seiko, as while they're hanging in there and are still pretty competitive, they don't dominate the entry-level space nearly the way they once did. I mean, they've effectively got one sub-300 pound option now, just presented in different makeup. And even that isn't visually or materially better than the majority of its rivals. The fact it was the only contender to feature a misaligned bezel is an apt metaphor for their current community standing. Frustration more than anything else. If I had to rank them, I'd probably place the Orient Mako 40 on top. The slightly smaller size won't be for everyone, and the crystal situation is far from perfect. But overall, I think it's probably the best all-rounder with the most distinctive colours and visuals of the bunch. While its weaknesses are annoying, they're not quite deal breakers. On that note, Orient added several new colours to the lineup in 2025, including brighter options that do a better job of cutting through the haze than this violet one, most of which avoid the terrible leather bands too. I mean, is this thing even real leather? Given the price discrepancy, the last-gen Mako and Ray 2s are also captivating lower-cost choices that you shouldn't simply write off just because they're slightly older. Sometimes old is gold. Either way, I doubt you'll have much buyer's remorse with any of these. They're all linked in the video description if you want to check them out, but it still may be worth taking into account some of the newer upcoming Chinese brands, which are arguably beating the Japanese in several areas. To learn more about those, check out the video on screen now, where I cover the best Chinese brands that don't just make copies. Because yes, there's still a chance you'll end up with a clone by accident. And what do you think of the new set, gents? Any good?